The storm had been building since noon. By 4:15, North Ridge had become something closer to a photograph than a city. Everything bleached still. The streets emptied out, the traffic lights swinging hard on their cables and throwing colors no one was there to obey. Temperature, 11 degrees Fahrenheit, dropping. Wind chill advisory in effect until midnight. Ethan Cole pulled his collar up and kept his head down. He had parked the hospital's service van beside the East Wing loading dock and was working on the undercarriage of a black Escalade that belonged to Logan Whitaker, chairman of the Whitaker Foundation, the single largest private donor in North Ridge Medical Center's history. The donation gala was in 6 weeks. Richard Hale, the facilities director, had personally reminded Ethan of this fact 3 times that week, each time allowing the implication to hang in the air like smoke. This car is more important than your hourly rate suggests. The issue was a failed transfer case seal. Oil had been weeping from it for weeks, and now it was running in thin, dark threads across the concrete. Ethan had the panel off, his fingers already going numb inside the thin mechanic's gloves. And he was working by feel and memory more than sight. He had rebuilt transfer cases before he had rebuilt things considerably more complicated than transfer cases, but he kept his pace steady and his tools in a clean line on the mat beside him because that was how he worked. Methodical, no shortcuts. The ambulance bay was 40 meters away, just visible past the corner of the East Wing. He noticed it the way he noticed most things peripherally, cataloged, filed, Bay 3, engine running, Unit 7 stenciled on the side door, a crew running a gurney out through the automatic doors. Then the engine coughed. Ethan paused. It coughed again. Twice a sound, he knew, a specific cadence, the kind that meant the electrical system was fighting itself. He kept his hands on the transfer case seal. The engine died. The silence that followed lasted about 2 seconds. Then the crew's voices went sharp. One of the paramedics, a woman in a blue jacket, was at the driver's door, cranking the ignition. Nothing. Again. Nothing. A third time. Ethan looked at the gurney. On it, strapped in, barely visible under the orange thermal blanket, was a child, small, 4, maybe 5 years old. The receiving nurse was bent over her, and Ethan could see, even at that distance, that they were moving fast. He looked at the Escalade. He looked at the child. He set the torque wrench on the mat, stood up, and walked toward the bay. Sir, you can't be in here." The paramedic in the blue jacket stepped in front of him. She had her hand raised, palm out. The universal gesture for stop. "Your ignition relay's fighting your fail-safe lockout," Ethan said. He did not stop walking. He said it the way someone announces weather flat. "Certain. Not up for debate. The solenoid is locked. You need to trip relay 7 manually, or the whole ignition chain reads as shorted and won't engage. It'll keep doing this until you do. Sir, this is an active medical. I'm going to pop the panel and bridge the relay. It'll take 90 seconds. Step back." She stepped back. Later, he would not be able to explain this moment cleanly. He understood why she hesitated. A stranger in a facility's uniform, no credentials, making a diagnosis on a piece of emergency equipment while a child lay dying on a gurney 6 feet away. In any version of the story where he was wrong, the consequences were catastrophic. In every version of the story where he did nothing, the outcome was fixed. He was not wrong. The panel on the driver's side electrical housing came open with a flathead. Ethan had his pen light in his teeth and his spare ring terminal already folded into his palm. The relay bank on a Unit 7 rig was the same generation as the transit buses the county had retired 3 years ago. He had serviced 4 of them. Relay 7 was third row, second from the left, a gray cap with a white stripe. He found it by touch. He bridged it. "Try the ignition," he said. The paramedic got in, turned the key. The engine turned over on the first crank, held. Settled into a steady idle. Ethan stepped back from the panel and closed it. The crew was already moving. The gurney went through the bay doors. The driver pulled out without looking back. Inside, through the small rear window, Ethan caught one frame of the child's face, eyes open, looking toward him, dark eyes above the oxygen mask, and then the unit was out into the snow, and the taillights disappeared. He stood in the bay for a moment. His hands were shaking slightly. That was adrenaline. Not cold. Then he walked back to the Escalade and picked up his torque wrench. He had maybe 30 minutes of daylight left. Ethan Cole was 34 years old and had been, at 26, one of the better systems engineers at an aerospace subcontractor in Seattle called Meridian Components. Not the best, he would have said that honestly, but in the top tier. He had a specific talent for reading systems under stress, for understanding not just how a mechanism was supposed to work, but how it would fail, and when, and in what sequence. His supervisor, a woman named Dr. Patricia Voss, had told him once that he had the rarest quality an engineer could have, which was the ability to stay calm when something was wrong and think backward from the failure to the cause. Most people panicked, she said. Ethan organized. He had met Rachel at a conference in Portland. She was an EMT then, working nights, studying for her nursing boards. They had talked for 3 hours about emergency systems protocols, because it turned out they were both interested in the same narrow problem: how people made decisions under time pressure, when the cost of an error was irreversible. They were married 14 months later. Mia was born in February, 3 years after that. Rachel died in April of the same year, a hemorrhage, fast, the kind that gives no warning and allows no intervention. She was 29. Ethan did not speak about this often or at length. What he had done, in the months after, was make a series of practical decisions. He had left Seattle. He had sold the apartment. He had taken a position at Northridge Medical Center as a senior maintenance technician, a title that significantly understated the work, since in practice, he was the person the hospital called when something broke badly enough that the standard tier contractors couldn't fix it. The pay was 32% less than his engineering salary. He did not find this troubling. He found it clarifying. His apartment was 6 blocks from Mia's school. Every morning they walked together, which took 12 minutes on dry pavement and a bit longer in weather. Mia was 6 now, in the 1st grade, and had developed a recent and serious interest in insects, which she referred to collectively as my bugs, as though she owned them. She had a library book about beetles that she had renewed so many times the librarian had stopped charging late fees. On Tuesday and Thursday nights, Ethan read to her from it. He had learned by osmosis more about buprested beetles than he had ever expected to know. They ate dinner together every night at 6:15, at the kitchen table, with the lights on and the television off. He did not think of himself as lonely, exactly. He thought of himself as occupied. The hospital's safety culture had been built, over 2 decades, by people who were afraid of liability. This was not unusual. It was, in some ways, rational. A large medical facility was a machine with hundreds of moving parts and a catastrophic failure mode at almost every junction, and the way to prevent catastrophic failures was to create systems with redundancies and authorities and clear chains of accountability. The problem, as Ethan had observed in his 3 years at Northridge, was that the chain of accountability had gradually become its own purpose. People followed procedures not because the procedures produced good outcomes, but because following the procedure transferred responsibility upward. The procedure was the shield. Richard Hale was the clearest expression of this culture. He was 51, slim, with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned that opinions were expensive. He managed facilities with perfect procedural compliance and zero tolerance for deviation. He had never, in Ethan's experience, said anything that could not be defended at a review board. He was not cruel, and he was not incompetent. He was entirely predictable. When Ethan returned to the Escalade after the ambulance bay, he had 42 minutes of work remaining on the transfer case seal. He completed it. He ran the diagnostic. He filed the service report on his tablet and emailed a copy to Richard's assistant. Then he packed his tools. The Escalade would not start. Not because of anything Ethan had done to the transfer case. That repair was clean. The battery had died while he was away from the vehicle. It had been running at about 60% capacity for weeks, flagged in a previous service report that no one had acted on. When the ambient temperature dropped to 11 degrees, 60% was not enough. He was reading the battery diagnostic on his screen when Richard Hale came around the corner of the building. The conversation was very short. Richard looked at the Escalade. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the tools on the mat. Still packed. "You left the vehicle," Richard said. "There was a child on a gurney," Ethan said. "You left the vehicle." "Yes." Richard looked at the Escalade again. His jaw worked once. Then, "Be in my office at 7 tomorrow morning." Ethan nodded. He called a jump start from the motor pool. The battery came up to charge in 6 minutes. He drove the Escalade to the parking structure and left the keys at the security desk with a note. "Battery at 12%. Recommend replacement before next use. Battery P.N. attached." He drove home in the service van. The snow was coming harder now. His headlights made a tunnel in it. He had been asked about it only twice in the days that followed, and both times he gave the same account, stripped of drama, the way an engineer describes a diagnostic sequence. The fail-safe lockout on the Unit 7 generation ambulances was a legacy system, installed in the early 2010s as a response to a liability concern involving unauthorized engine starts. The logic was sound in theory. If the vehicle's electrical system detected an irregular ignition signature caused, in this case, by a faulty ground in the engine bay that had been generating voltage spikes for weeks, it would lock the starter relay to prevent what it interpreted as a tampering attempt. Unauthorized engine starts were rare. Unauthorized engine starts, while a child in respiratory distress was loaded in the back, were rarer. The system did not distinguish between these scenarios because the system had not been designed for the second one. Relay 7 was the manual override point for this lockout, accessible from the driver's side panel without tools, placed there deliberately by the manufacturer for exactly these contingencies. It was in the service manual. It was in the training materials. Whether the paramedic team had been briefed on it was a separate question. Ethan had known about it because he had serviced the county transit buses, and because, 3 months earlier, he had read the ambulance fleet maintenance log out of habit and noticed a recurring voltage irregularity on Unit 7 that no one had investigated. He had written a memo. He had sent it to Richard's assistant. There was no evidence it had been read. The whole sequence, from the moment he reached the panel to the moment the engine caught, was 87 seconds. He knew this because one of the receiving nurses had been watching from the bay entrance, and she had counted. Richard Hale's office smelled like coffee and toner. It was a clean, functional room with nothing on the walls except the regulatory posters the state required, and a laminated copy of the facility's mission statement. Richard sat behind his desk with a printed copy of something in front of him, and beside him sat a woman from HR whose name Ethan did not know. "You abandoned a priority repair," Richard said. "The vehicle was in no danger of being damaged," Ethan said. "The battery issue was pre-existing and unrelated to my work. That's not the point." "I know it's not the point." Richard looked at him. "There is a protocol for medical emergencies in the vehicle bay. It involves calling the emergency line, which routes to the duty supervisor, who coordinates with the medical staff. You bypassed that protocol completely. The call would have taken longer than the repair. That's not your assessment to make." Ethan said nothing. "You also interfered with a piece of emergency medical equipment without authorization, without training certification for that specific system. I'm certified on the equivalent transit bus electrical systems. The architecture is identical, and without any authority from this facility or any medical authority to do so." Richard set the paper flat on the desk. If something had gone wrong, if that vehicle had failed in transit, if there had been an electrical fire, if the child... "She didn't," Ethan said. "Silence. That's not your job," Richard said. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Not with hostility, with something more like curiosity. "Then your system is broken," he said. Richard terminated him, effective immediately. The formal letter cited violation of facility protocols, unauthorized interference with emergency medical equipment, and abandonment of an assigned priority task. The HR woman slid a separation agreement across the desk and indicated where he should sign. He signed it. He turned in his badge and his van keys at the security desk. The woman behind the counter, whose name was Gloria, and who had always saved him the second cup from the first pot of the morning. Did not say anything. She looked at his badge for a long moment after he laid it down. Then she looked up and said, very quietly, "You did the right thing." He drove home in his own truck. It was not yet noon when he got home. Mia was at school. The apartment was quiet, in the specific way apartments are quiet when the person who makes all the noise is absent. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the stack of bills on the counter: utilities, Mia's after-school program, the truck insurance, and did a rough calculation in his head. He had 6 weeks of savings, maybe 8 if he was careful. He would need to file for unemployment, which would take 2 to 3 weeks to process. He would need to update his resume, which would take an afternoon. He would start calling contacts tomorrow. None of this was catastrophic, technically. It was serious. It was manageable. He drank his coffee and looked out the window at the snow, which had thinned overnight and was coming down now as something between sleet and fine powder. The street was empty. The corner stop sign had a 3-inch shelf of white on top of it, perfectly balanced. He picked up Mia at 3:10. She came out of the school with her backpack on, and her hat pulled down over her ears and her face pink from the cold, and she walked straight to him and took his hand without breaking stride, which was what she did when she had been waiting to tell him something and couldn't wait any longer. "There's a beetle," she said, "that can survive being completely frozen. Like, frozen solid. And then it thaws out, and it's fine." "Which one?" Ethan said. "It's in the book. I'll show you." They walked home. She told him about the beetle, a Cucujas clavipes. She read to him that evening with a concentration that was very nearly painful to watch. A small face bent over a large book, one finger tracing the text. And he made pasta with tomato sauce, which was what she wanted on cold nights. And they sat at the table and ate it. At some point, because Mia was perceptive in ways that routinely caught him off guard, she looked up from her bowl and said, "You're quiet. I lost my job today," he said. She considered this seriously, the way she considered most things. "Why?" "I left the car I was supposed to be fixing to fix a different car, one that needed it more." "Was it an emergency?" "Yes." She nodded. "So you did the right thing." "That's what Gloria said." "Who's Gloria?" "Someone at work." "Was someone at work?" Mia ate another forkful of pasta. "Are we going to be okay?" He looked at his daughter. 6 years old, not afraid of frozen beetles, not afraid of hard questions. "Yes," he said. "We are. Okay." She looked back at her bowl. Then, "Dad?" "Yeah. The beetle is called a flat bark beetle, in case you forget." He had not been going to forget. But he said, "Got it." 3 days later, at 8:40 the morning, his phone rang. He was at the kitchen table with his laptop and a second cup of coffee, revising his resume. The number was the hospital's main line, and he almost didn't answer. But he picked up on the 4th ring. "Mr. Cole? This is Claire Dawson. I'm a charge nurse in the pediatric ICU at North Ridge." "Yes," he said. "I wanted to let you know the girl from the ambulance bay. Sophie. She's been discharged. She's going to be fine." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad to hear that." "There's something else," Claire said. She paused in a way that suggested she was choosing her words. "Her full name is Sophie Bennett. Her mother is Evelyn Bennett." He knew the name. Everyone in the facility knew the name. Evelyn Bennett was the CEO of Northridge Medical Center. Had been for 7 years. She had come from a health system in Boston, rebuilt the hospital's financial position in 3 years, and was generally regarded as precisely the kind of administrator who was impossible to argue with because she was almost always right. "I see," Ethan said. "I don't know if it changes anything," Claire said. "I just thought you should know." "Thank you," he said. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the table. He looked at his revised resume. He did not call anyone. He did not send any emails. He went back to his resume. The thought crossed his mind, of course it did. He was not sentimental about human nature, that this information was valuable, that a call to the right person, a conversation, A gentle mention of what had happened in the bay could translate into something. A reinstatement. A reference. He was aware of the leverage that existed in the fact that the hospital CEO's child was alive, partly because a man the hospital had fired 3 days ago had put his job on the line in a snowstorm. He was also aware that using it that way would make him someone he did not want to be. He finished his resume. He sent 3 job applications. He made lunch. Evelyn Bennett had not slept properly in 4 days. She had slept in the chair beside Sophie's hospital bed, which did not count. She had slept at home for 3 hours on Tuesday night and been awake at 2 in the morning standing in Sophie's empty room, which also did not count. Her assistant, Marcus, had been routing everything non-essential away from her calendar and had been doing it well, which meant that by Thursday morning she had a backlog of decisions and a board meeting in 5 days and a daughter who was home and safe and asleep in the room down the hall. She made coffee at 5:15 and opened her laptop at the kitchen table at 6 because it was how she processed things, by watching, by reviewing, by going back to the evidence. She logged into the hospital's security camera system and pulled the footage from the East Wing exterior cameras, the ambulance bay cameras, and the parking structure camera for the evening of the storm. She watched it in the order it happened. She watched the ambulance arrive. She watched the crew load Sophie. She watched the engine fail. She watched a man in a facilities uniform set down his tools and walk across 40 meters of snow toward the bay. Deliberate. Not running. Moving the way someone moves when they have decided something, and the decision is final. She watched him talk to the paramedic. She watched the paramedic step back. She watched him open the panel and work. 87 seconds, she counted. She had been told 87 seconds, and she counted it herself anyway. She watched the ambulance pull away. She watched him stand in the empty bay for 4 seconds still, looking at the direction the unit had gone, and then turn and walk back to the Escalade. She watched him pick up his torque wrench. She sat with the footage for a long time. She replayed the section with the panel twice. Then she looked up the termination paperwork which was in the system, because it was required to be in the system, and she read Richard Hale's incident report, which took about 3 minutes, and she read Ethan Cole's service history going back to his hire date, which took about 15, and she found the memo about the Unit 7 voltage irregularity, time-stamped 11 weeks earlier, routed to Richard Hale's assistant, and never acknowledged. She poured her coffee out and made a fresh cup. Then she made a call. He answered on the second knock. He looked at her the way she imagined he would look at most unexpected things, taking the information in, sorting it, not reacting. She was in a gray coat, no hospital lanyard, just herself. She had not brought Marcus or anyone else. She had not called ahead. The decision had felt important enough to make in person. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Miss Bennett," he said. He opened the door wider. She stepped in. The apartment was small and clean, and had a drawing on the refrigerator, held by a star-shaped magnet, a beetle, she thought, or possibly a bus. The kitchen table had a laptop and a coffee mug and a yellow legal pad with notes. The kind of home that was organized not for guests, but for someone who lived there and knew where everything was. He poured her coffee without asking. She sat at the table. "Sophie is home," she said. "I heard," he said. "I'm glad. You already knew who she was. It was not a question." He had the look of someone who had been waiting for the conversation to arrive. "I found out the day before yesterday," he said. "And you didn't call?" "No." She looked at him. "Why not?" He thought about this. Not defensively, he was thinking about the honest answer, not the safe one. "Because it wasn't why I did it," he said. "And because if I called, I would have been using Sophie as a bargaining chip." "She's not a bargaining chip." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "I watched the footage," she said. "All of it." He nodded. "I also read the memo you wrote about the Unit 7 electrical issue." She set her hands flat on the table. 11 weeks ago, something crossed his face then, not anger. Something more controlled than that. The expression of a person who had been right about something and had watched the wrongness of it play out and had not said, "I told you," because it was not the kind of thing that deserved that. "I sent it," he said. "I can only send it." "No," Evelyn said. "That's the part I got wrong. You sent it, and the system swallowed it. and nobody with authority to act on it did anything. And my daughter almost died in a parking lot because of that. She said this evenly, like a diagnosis, not performance. Just the truth, stated precisely. I want to talk about what happens next. I'm not looking for a settlement. I know you're not. She paused. I'm not here to offer you one. The all-staff meeting was called for Friday morning. Mandatory attendance for all department heads, senior staff, and shift supervisors. It was listed in the internal calendar as a facilities review, which was accurate in the specific way that descriptions can be technically accurate and entirely misleading. Evelyn stood at the front of the main conference room, which seated 80 and was at capacity. She did not have a presentation deck. She had a laptop connected to the projector, and on the screen was a still image from the security footage, the parking lot, the snow, a man in a facilities uniform walking toward the ambulance bay. She let them look at it for a moment. Then she played the footage. She did not narrate it. She let it run. The bay, the engine failure, the paramedic stepping back, the man at the panel, 87 seconds, the ambulance pulling away. She let it run to the part where he walked back to the Escalade and picked up his torque wrench. The room was completely silent. She stopped the footage. The child in the ambulance was my daughter Sophie, she said. She was experiencing a hypoxic episode. If the ambulance had not started within approximately 3 to 4 minutes, she would not have survived the wait for a second unit. No one moved. The man who started the ambulance is Ethan Cole. He was employed here as a senior maintenance technician until Tuesday of this week, when he was terminated for abandoning an assigned vehicle repair to intervene in this situation. She paused. I terminated him. The termination was authorized by my facility director and ratified through our standard HR process. And it was wrong. She looked around the room slowly. I want to talk about a specific pattern I've been watching for 3 years and have not addressed adequately, which is the tendency of this institution to protect procedures at the expense of outcomes. She said this without heat, clean and precise. We have built an accountability structure that functions primarily as a liability shield. We have created a culture where the correct response to a child dying in a parking lot is to call a supervisor hotline and wait for authorization, where a memo flagging a dangerous equipment failure disappears into an approval queue for 11 weeks. She could feel the room's weight shifting. People looking at the table. People not looking at Richard Hale, which was itself a kind of looking at Richard Hale. Richard has submitted his resignation this morning, she said. I've accepted it. A breath in the room. Not surprise. Exactly. Recognition. Effective immediately. We are creating a new role. Emergency Systems Authority. A senior technical position with facility-wide standing to make unilateral decisions in life-threatening situations involving mechanical, electrical, or systems failures. The role will also carry oversight of preventive maintenance protocols and equipment safety reviews. She closed the laptop. I've offered that position to Ethan Cole. He's accepted it. She let the silence hold for a moment. I want to say one more thing, she said. Not as CEO. Just as Sophie's mother. She was quiet for a second. He didn't know who she was. He didn't stop because of who she was. He stopped because a child needed help, and he could help her. That's the thing this institution is supposed to be. She closed the folder in front of her. We're going to be that again. Sophie came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the meeting, escorted by her mother and holding a piece of paper folded twice. Ethan's new office was on the second floor of the East Wing, a room with a window that looked directly down onto the ambulance bay. He had arranged his desk to face the window, which he knew was deliberate and which he didn't try to justify to anyone. Sophie was 5 years old, he now knew, dark-haired like her mother, with the same quality of stillness in her face, as though she was thinking about something more interesting than what was currently happening around her. She stood in the doorway of his office and looked at him with the particular assessment of a 5-year-old who has not yet learned to pretend. Hi, she said. Hi, he said. She walked in and held out the folded paper. He unfolded it. It was a drawing in crayon red, blue, a lot of yellow. He could make out a truck and a figure standing beside it, and what appeared to be a lot of lines radiating from the figure, which he thought might be snow. In the corner, in large, careful letters, that had been written by someone who knew most of the alphabet and was working hard on the rest. "Thank you." He looked at the drawing for a moment, he said, in case he had not understood. "I got that," he said. "It's very good." "I'm good at trucks," she said, with complete honesty. "You are," he agreed. She looked at the window. "That's where the ambulance goes?" "Yes." She studied it seriously, the way a person studies a place that they know has been important, even if they do not remember the specifics. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned and walked back to her mother, who was standing in the doorway with her hands in her coat pockets, and an expression on her face that Ethan could not entirely categorize. It was not the face of a CEO, and it was not only the face of a mother. It was the face of someone who had watched something clearly and was still sorting out what she owed it. "She's going to be fine," Ethan said. "I know," Evelyn said. "That's what matters." She looked at him. "You know that's not nothing what you did." "I know," he said. "I'm not pretending it's nothing. I just don't think it's extraordinary. I think it's what the job is." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she almost smiled the corner of her mouth, controlled. The expression of someone managing something they did not want to oversell. "That's why you have the job," she said. "He picked Mia up at 3:10, same as always." She came out in her hat and her backpack and walked straight to him and took his hand. "Did you see the ambulance today?" she asked. She had developed a recent and serious interest in his new job, which she had described to her class during show and tell as "my dad fixes the emergency things." Her teacher had sent a note home calling this wonderful. Ethan had saved the note. "Saw two," he said. "Both running okay?" "Both running fine." She nodded with satisfaction. They walked. The temperature had come up since the storm. It was still cold, still January. But the particular brutality of the blizzard had passed, and the city was finding its way back to its normal gray and salted self. There were patches of bare sidewalk now. The stop sign on the corner had lost its shelf of snow. "Dad," Mia said. "Yeah. The flat bark beetle survives being frozen because it makes a special chemical inside its cells, like antifreeze. So the ice can't form the wrong way and break things." He had learned, by now, not to ask where she got this information. She got it from the book, or from something she had looked up after the book, or from some connection she had made between the book and something else. The supply was apparently inexhaustible. "That's very good engineering," he said. "That's what I thought," she said. They went home. He made dinner pasta, because it was cold, and they ate at the table with the lights on and the television off. And outside the kitchen window, the last of the storm's snow was melting off the parked cars in thin streams that caught the last of the afternoon light before it went. The drawing was on the refrigerator now, held by the star-shaped magnet, next to the Beetle book's overdue notice, and Mia's class photo, and a service reminder he had written for himself about Unit 3's fuel injectors. A truck in crayon, a lot of yellow lines. "Thank you," in very large letters. He looked at it sometimes when he was standing at the counter in the morning, waiting for the coffee to come up. Not for long. Just a glance. The same glance he gave the street outside, and the temperature on the weather app, and the day's work lined up on his phone. Then he'd pour the coffee and get moving. There was always something that needed fixing.